Alrighty, good afternoon everyone. This is Bram for Dr. Mays' class for Unit 2 in Warren Brown's Violence in Medieval Europe. So I actually really liked this question for the discussion board contribution of what comparisons would we draw between the violence in medieval Europe and the violence in our present day society and times. And I think that Brown's arguments was very sufficient and interesting for this specific question. So like I talked about in my writing assignment post, that violence in the Middle Ages was personal, direct, and visceral, and involved not guns or bombs, but swords, knives, and lances. So this specific statement, I think, really highlights a lot of the differences between the medieval Europeans' forms of violence and our own. It's not that and I think Brown discusses this too, it's not that the violence was more prevalent during the medieval time periods of medieval Europe. It was just different, right? Because they didn't have this weaponry that the people of present times have necessarily, right? Like we didn't have guns or bombs that were created or invented yet in medieval Europe, but it was just different, right? It was more emotional. It was direct. It was just a different form of violence that we experience nowadays in contemporary times. But also, what Brown does really well of is shows some of the similarities between medieval European violence then and contemporary violence now, as in the difference between the public and the private sphere of violence, right? Especially in concerning the violence for royal members of society and the political elite, how violence sort of shifted into a public sphere of direct violence and public rituals to a more private sphere where there were like political assassinations and violence became more of like a stealth thing, right? Like where the violence was not done in public, but it still occurred, and there was a lot occurring in the political infighting in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries especially. So I think that is a very important aspect for us to understand with Brown's work. Not that the medieval European violence was a lot more prevalent then. It was simply different.